In this example, we're going to look at adding and subtracting signed decimals. So here is a summary of some of the processes we learn about adding integers, which are positive and negative whole numbers. So when we add two or more numbers, if they have the same sign, you add the absolute values of the numbers and keep the sign of the numbers. So I'm just going to give a couple examples as we go. 3 plus 5 is 8. If you had negative 3 plus negative 5, it is negative 8. Okay, so negative 3, so they're both negative. Your answer is negative. You're adding up the two absolute values, 3 and 5, and you get negative 8. Now, if the numbers have different signs, we're going to subtract the numbers, subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger, and keep the sign of the number with the larger absolute value. So let's look at this. If we had, say, 3 plus negative 7, and then we'll also look at negative 3 plus positive 7. Well, the absolute values for both of these are 3 and 7 is larger. So in both of these cases, we want to find 7 minus 3, which is 4. And that's a subtraction we'll do for each problem. Notice I'm not putting an equal sign here because this doesn't necessarily equal this. Actually, in this case, it does not. Here it does. But now, our final answer is the original sign of the number with the larger absolute value. So here, let me just put a little line. Since the absolute value of negative 7 is larger, that was a 7, this will be negative 4. Here, 7 is larger and it's positive, so this answer is positive 4. Okay. And then finally, when subtracting two decimals, we can use the following fact. Subtracting a decimal from a number is the same as adding the decimal's opposite to the number. So if you'd like to, and we'll use this a few times, if you're given a subtraction problem, you can rewrite it as an addition problem, and then we can use the rules above. So for example, if I had 7 minus 5, I would honestly just say that's 2. I probably wouldn't write it as 7 plus negative 5. Subtract the numbers 2, 7 is larger and it's positive, and we have 2. That's a lot of work. However, if I had negative 3 minus negative 8, I would probably rewrite this as an addition problem. And it's mostly the minus and negative can get a little bit cumbersome. So this is equal to, based on this fact, negative 3 plus, change this to addition, take the opposite of this number. Well, the opposite of negative 8 is positive 8. And to me, this is a lot more simple. So now we have negative 3 plus 8. The signs are different, so I subtract them. And since 8 is larger than 3 and 8 is positive, the answer is positive. So that's just a quick review of what we're going to do based on integers, but now we're going to use these ideas with decimals. So let's look at a few problems. Use the rules for signed numbers to add or subtract the decimals. So let's look at our first problem. So here I'm going to write the rules that we're using underneath it before we do the process. And you don't need to do this, but it's good to do it first just so you can remember why you're doing what you're doing, and so you don't just start using the rules quickly and using them incorrectly. So I'm adding two negatives. So I'm going to add, that should be TWO. I'm going to add their absolute values. And the sign of the answer is negative. So the absolute value of 0.14, negative 0.14, is 0.14. And I'm going to add the absolute value of this number. So I'm just going to drop the negative sign. So remember, I'm not taking the I'm taking the opposite in this case, but the opposite is the absolute value, which is always positive. If the number is positive, then the opposite is negative. So now I can add these numbers. I lined up the place value in the decimals. 4 plus 7 is 11. 2, 3, 4. Bring down the decimal, and we have 0. So our sum is going to be negative, because the original two numbers were negative, negative 0.41. Let's look at the next one. I am adding numbers with different signs. So I'm going to subtract the absolute values, the smaller from the larger, and my answer, now is it going to be positive or negative? Well, notice the larger absolute value, 7.24, without the negative sign, is larger than 5.63. So the sign of the answer is going to be the sign of this number, which is negative. Okay, so you want to start with the larger number, subtracting the order matters. So the larger absolute value number is 7.24. I am going to subtract the absolute value of 5.63 as just itself, 5.63. Now let's find the difference. 4 minus 3 is 1. 2 minus 6, well, I'm going to have to borrow. 12 minus 6 is 6. Bring down the decimal, and 6 minus 5 is 1. So my answer is negative 1.61. One more problem. Okay, so this is a subtraction problem, and it's subtracting a negative, and I like to change these to adding a positive. So I'm going to rewrite this as negative 4.2, change the subtraction to addition, and take the opposite of this number, which is 3.8. Now this is my new problem, and notice it's similar in structure to this problem. I'm adding numbers with different signs. There's a negative and a positive. So I need to subtract the absolute values. And since 4.2 is bigger than 3.8, my final answer is going to be negative. So for my process, rather than rewriting it, we'll just refer to that. So the absolute value of negative 4.2 is 4.2. That's the larger absolute value, so I'm going to start with that. I'm going to subtract the smaller absolute value of 3.8. Okay, this is one I like to take a minute to think about. If you visualize this, you don't have to do as much math. 3.8 is just 0.4 away from 4.2. So we need 0.2 to have 4, and then 0.2 more to get 4.2. So when you start thinking about those, and when you're comfortable, you can use that process to do subtraction, but our other method will always work. So 2 minus 8, I have to borrow, cross out the 4, put a 3, here's a 12. 12 minus 8 is 4. Make sure to put the decimal point, it got a little hidden there, and 3 minus 3 is 0. So now remember, our final answer is negative, so our answer here is negative 0.4.